years running a series of software teams for an organization, a US-based organization. I ran the LAMP here in Montreal. And I started realizing that things weren't going so well. This was the tail end of the dot-com crash. We'd gone through our 3 rounds of layoffs. I was pretty depressed going to work on a daily basis. So were the folks who worked for me. So I had this idea. I needed to do something with my management team. I needed to change things up. And I thought some sort of management leadership development. You know, I just had that idea. But really, I didn't know anything more. The one thing I did know is I don't want any fluff. I don't want to go to some program at a university and spend $3,000 and listen to all sorts of great stuff and then come back to the office and just frankly be a day late on all my projects. And I grew up in Nortel. If anyone remembers, Nortel was a very large Canadian firm, and I remember as a young manager going to the first young new manager training program, and Nortel was brilliant in the mid-90s, and you'd go to the program and you'd get one of those big binders. Anyone remember the huge binders? And it was sort of the bigger the binder, the better the program, and you get that binder, you stick the binder back on your cubicle, and you sort of collect all these binders. But they have nothing to do with what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. So anyhow, I said, I'm going to do something about this for my management team. I'm going to do some management leadership development, but I have no time, I have no money, and I don't want fluff. I'm an engineer, so I want something that works. And I got a chance to talk to Henry, and Henry alluded to this, and the first thing Henry said was, you should read my book. Right? So I said, great, I'll read your book. It was Managers, Not MBAs. And it sort of clued me into this idea that the key of what Henry was saying is just get people together to talk about what's going on, reflect on their own experiences, and for me that means storytelling about what I did yesterday and the day before, and do that in light of conceptual ideas. And that eventually led to this Coaching Ourselves, which we eventually founded with Henry in 2007. Last year, roughly speaking, 18, maybe upwards of 20,000 managers used it on a semi-regular basis in organizations around the world. Now, as many of you know, this is one of many group-based learning trends that are ongoing in our space right now. Social learning at ATD in Florida over the spring was much more prominent than it had been. They'll start with talk about learning from each other, then they'll talk about social learning. We're going to use the term peer coaching. They're all group-based learning. Otto Scharmer does a great thing now. Henry's just launching the MOOC that's not just a MOOC, but it's a group-based MOOC. So you don't do it as an individual, you always do it as a group. So there's a lot of stuff going on where people are realizing that learning in small groups has got to be a key component to any learning intervention that you're doing in an organization. And especially when you're talking about leadership development and management development. So what Deloitte has written, and one of the things that they've spoken about that's through Bersin and Associates, is this idea that rather than delivering training, one should think about creating a self-developing organization, right? And your job as an HR professional, frankly, when the CEO is talking to the HR professional, it should be, how do you create a self-developing organization? And that doesn't mean training, that means all sorts of different things. And some of the points that Bersin makes is people have to make time to teach and coach each other's. Leaders at all levels are teaching these things. People are hired for learning agility. Of course, you hire somebody not because of what they know, but because of their ability to learn new things fairly quickly and be flexible. And learning is valued part of the culture. It's the largest study they do, and it's lovely because it's a longitudinal study. What they've seen over the past couple of years is really the number one issue that the senior leaders are reporting about vis-a-vis what HR should be worrying about, or L&D, is culture and engagement. They want the culture and engagement to be fixed, to be better, to be like this. The point is leadership development drives culture and engagement. Originally, and still in many cases, leadership development is thought of as closing skills gaps and these sort of things. But more and more, leadership development is thought of as the key driver for culture and engagement. And the approach, the way in which you deliver leadership development has at least as much impact as the content that you deliver. And that's sort of the key message that a lot of folks are learning, which is why the group-based learning and different ways of doing leadership development are becoming important. As Henry started with his first book in 1973 called The Nature of Managerial Work. And he did this wonderful study at the time. I think it was fairly unique. He actually went and observed managers. Most people wrote about what managers should be doing or what they think managers should be doing so that these hierarchical organizations would work well. This is 1973. And Henry went and just spent a day with a manager. In fact, he did it with 29 managers in 29 different organizations. And he just wrote quite, this is what, had a meeting, had a call, it got interrupted, yada, yada, yada. And then Henry did what he always does, which is he conceptualized it for all of us and gave us a picture of what's going on in the real world. And sure enough, for anyone who's managed, managers don't do a lot of, planning and strategizing and these sort of things. They run around for the most part, getting interrupted, never really having more than 7 minutes before somebody interrupts whatever it is they're doing. This is what a typical manager does at almost any level in the organization, in almost any organization. And so Henry always continued with this sort of observational study, look at what's going on in the real world, conceptualize it so that the rest of us can understand, and then force all of us to think about this and to face the facts that this is what's going on, so what are you going to do about it? And back in '73, the professors were saying, no, this is what managers should be doing. And Henry says, no, but this is what they are doing. So instead of trying to change what they do, let's help them do what they do a little bit better. And that's where you get into management education. Given that this is what managers do on a day-to-day basis, how can we help them do it a little bit better? And it's not about teaching them about marketing and finance, though that's all very useful. It's about essentially what he came down to, just give a manager an opportunity to stop and think. And of course, everyone says, I don't have time to stop and think. And study after study shows that those managers that take time to stop and think have time to stop and think. And those managers that don't take time to stop and think don't have time because they never think about what they're doing and they tend to do a lot of foolish things. That's not management development. A lot of them are learning an awful lot about management, and there's nothing wrong with learning about management in this sort of a context, but they're not learning to be managers. And there's Henry's picture of his IMPM program, IMHL program. The professor will start by introducing a conceptual idea. Maybe they'll talk for about 2 or 3 minutes and introduce a little segment of a conceptual idea. Then the professor will drop a question into the table that gets the participants to talk about what they did last week. So they'll tell a story related to that segment of a conceptual idea. And that whole thing will take about 10 minutes. So you've got this little 10-minute cycle. Professor talks, then there's a discussion for a couple of minutes, then it goes back to the professor to talk for another 2 or 3 minutes and introduce a bit more depth or a nuance to the conceptual idea or build on that, and then another question for the participants to continue talking. So the point to finish with this is little cycles. Professor talks for 2-3 minutes, students talk for 2-3 minutes, 10-minute cycle, you have 90 minutes, do that 9 times. So what we did with Coaching Ourselves is we just said, great, let me just get rid of the classroom, get rid of the professor, and that's a lot cheaper and a lot easier, and tell people they can do this on their own. And it started with that idea. And that's what these little groups are. You got a bit of content on each page, which is the professor talking, and then you have a discussion. One thing that we noticed that's interesting with Coaching Ourselves, you might do Coaching Ourselves with a single team, and that's great, you'll get a lot of impact. You might do it with 3 or 4 teams. Once you start to enter an organization and you get hundreds of teams all doing this, then you start to see a broader impact on the organization because of a shared language, a shared experience, and a shared context. And that's where the idea of building a broader sense of community starts to evolve in the organization. And you really can see, or you can feel, I should say, in other words, the senior leaders will talk about the feeling of a different sense of folks working together and talking with each other. So thank you all very much for participating today. It was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you very much.